Welcome everyone to our Montessori Leaders and Managers webinar. As I'm sure you are all preoccupied, anxious, worried, but also this webinar is designed to reassure you about the future of what will happen with the EYFS. I felt it would be the best approach to this issue to invite a colleague with whom I have worked for a long time on the Early Childhood Forum, Melanie Pilcher, who is the Quality and Standards Manager at the Early Years Alliance. Some of you may have already accessed some of their work. If you are not familiar with their work, I would strongly recommend that you visit their website and that you find out what they have to offer, and that perhaps now that we don't have Montessori Schools Association, you join the Early Years Alliance as a very positive option to being guided in a professional manner about the policies and requirements that your work needs. I will be supported again by dear Wendelin, who always makes these sessions very straightforward. And we will also not have, or we will not have our breakout sessions. At the end of Melanie's presentation, we would like to ask you to please put questions in the chat box and we will explore them. Melanie just very, very kindly offered her crib sheet for quick, frequently asked questions that she will be preparing for the Early Years Alliance membership, and she has offered to share it with us too. So I hope that you will be well equipped to tackle this challenge of the new or revised Early Years Foundation stage. As I said in the blog on the weekend, the changes are relatively small and it is an issue of articulation. And I hope you will agree with me at the end of Melanie's presentation. So over to you, Melanie. And would you like to say something about yourself before we look at your PowerPoint?
Indeed, Barbara, thank you very much. So yes, I have been working in early years and childcare for a scarily long time now. It seemed for ages I was saying it was for about 10 years, and all of a sudden it's crept up to nearly 30 years. I work for the Early Years Alliance, and I work very closely with the Department for Education and with Ofsted as well, to ensure that I can actually disseminate information out to all of our members and actually feed back to policymakers and to Ofsted about the issues that you are facing out there, what matters to you as well. I'm a very great believer in not doing things to people. You know, this is the way you've got to do it. Here's the information, now go off and do it. I'm very much of the mindset that actually we need to listen to providers out there and make sure that we get the messages across about the realities of what's happening in early years. In my role for the Alliance, I write many publications, I write training, a lot of training for the Alliance, and I always deliver the first round of any training that I've written to see how it goes, and because it gives me the opportunity to talk directly to providers. I'm in and out of settings whenever I get the opportunity, and I'm a huge advocate for outdoors as a forest school leader myself, something that I'm very passionate about. I have expertise in safeguarding and infection control, so these tend to be the things that I lead on for the Alliance, but also more and more for curriculum and practice as well. So a little bit of everything for my sins. So, okay, Wendelin, if you wouldn't mind to start sharing the slides, and I will take you through what is going to be an overview. I think if we wanted to go into huge detail, we would probably be here till tomorrow morning. So I'm sure all of you will appreciate that I've tried to get this into a very concise presentation for you, with time to talk afterwards and ask those questions. So I always think it's very useful to start with a brief history of the EYFS, and I'm not going to start back from 2008, but I thought we'd have a quick look at how this iteration of the EYFS has come about. And it was back in 2018 that an advisory panel was set up by the DfE to advise on changes that they proposed to make to the early learning goals. Now, this always caused some controversy because of the lack of early years input into those changes that were being proposed and those changes that were actually made. However, the DfE did plough ahead with them, and in 2018-19, a pilot of the draft early learning goals was carried out in 24 schools. And again, the concern about the lack of involvement with the early years sector at this stage. In the meantime, back in September 2019, Ofsted launched a new education inspection framework, which I'm sure you are all pretty much familiar with now, even though, of course, Ofsted inspections have been suspended and we know that they will resume again towards the autumn. I think they're saying now from September they will start inspecting early years settings again, and that's just in time for the launch of the new EYFS as well. So that education inspection framework, in a sense, set the tone for what the focus of the new early years foundation stage and the new early learning goals and the focus on the educational programs was going to look like. Because Ofsted talked very much about the intent, the implementation and the impact of your early years curriculum. And if you bear that in mind and think about that as you look at your educational programs, you'll see how that all links together. And we'll talk about that more later. In 2019, the consultation into the revised early learning goals was opened, and this closed on the 31st of January 2020. And this gave us all the opportunity in early years to really have a voice and say what we were concerned about, what we liked, what we didn't like. And I mean, Barbara, I'd probably leave you to talk more about the role of the coalition at that time if we feel that it's necessary to do so. In February this year, we had a draft EYFS issued. So by now we've seen two different versions, two different drafts of the EYFS, and a further consultation was launched, and that closed on the 19th of March. Then later on in March, we had the final version of the early years foundation stage issued to us. It's not going to change again. This is it. And we are relatively thankful that we have a long lead in to September. So we've had early sight of the early learning goals. We knew more or less how the revised early years foundation stage was going to look. So we've had this long lead in. And in normal circumstances, we would have welcomed that and we would have felt that we were really ready to go because we'd have had all this time to prepare. But then, of course, we had a pandemic and we still have a pandemic. And that really blew everything off course because for most providers out there, your main concern has been keeping your children safe, keeping your staff safe, and actually just keeping going. Just coping with the day-to-day issues, the day-to-day challenges of actually dealing with the pandemic. So most people have put thoughts of what the new early years foundation stage means to one side. It's one of those things when you're busy, when you're trying to deal with one thing at a time, you just deal with what is going to happen tomorrow and the next day. And I think it's only now as things start to settle down a little bit that people are really turning their minds to September and thinking about what they will need to do. Okay, Wendelin, if we can move on. Thank you. So what has changed then? Well, actually not a lot as far as we're concerned in early years. The EYFS still looks pretty much the same. Front cover's the same. You pick it up and look at it. You've still got the three sections, section 1, the learning and development requirements, and the new early learning goals. And this perhaps is where the major changes are. So the new early learning goals, we'll have a brief look at those in a moment. What we're concerned with are the descriptions of the educational programs for each early learning goal, because these have been expanded and you will see there's much more detail in them. And that's really where our attention should be focused. Section 2 in the EYFS is still assessment. Nothing's really changed for us. There's still the requirement for the 2-year-old progress check. There's still the requirement for formative assessment, and still the requirement there for that summative assessment. What has changed is the reception baseline assessment. There is guidance in there which is new. And this caught some of us by surprise. We all knew that it was something that they were trying to push through, but actually when it suddenly appeared in the revised EYFS, it caught many of us by surprise. However, we don't have to worry about it. It's something that's undertaken within the first 6 weeks of a child starting in reception. And as I said, there's further guidance for that. So if you're interested, then do have a look by all means. But, you know, busy people, I think we go back to the educational programs, which are our focus. Also changes to the early years foundation stage profile, again, which don't directly affect us because, as you know, this happens at the end of reception, and this is where those early learning goals are assessed. So again, not something that we have to worry about. And the change, if I get the wording right, is that local authorities no longer have to moderate the EYFSP. And that's as much as I need to know. So that's as much as I've taken in about it. Then we come to section 3, safeguarding and welfare requirements, still almost exactly the same. However, there have been some tweaks, and what they've done is they've taken the opportunity to update on things that needed updating since 2017. So one of the major changes that you will see is there is one new requirement, and that is to promote oral health. So again, we'll have a little chat about that. I did a session similar to this for Alliance members at the end of last week, and I was surprised actually how many people asked me, well, what does that look like? What does that mean for our practice in our setting? So if that's something that's a question for you, then please do type that into the box and we can actually talk about that later. The other change that's significant really in the safeguarding and welfare requirements, that they have changed reference to local safeguarding children's boards to local safeguarding partners. Because in the revised working together in when they updated it in 2018, 2019, there was that requirement that local safeguarding children's boards would become local safeguarding partners, and they would consist of those partners being the police, health, education, social care, and they would have that overarching responsibility. And the idea of bringing those 4 statutory bodies together meant that actually the hope is that actually safeguarding will be more streamlined and more effective locally. So those are the only real changes. Oh, there's one other that I did actually want to mention as well. There's some additional guidance that has been slipped into the footnotes of the EYFS. Barbara, Wendelin, I will send you. I actually took the time. Some people think I have too much time on my hands. I went through the EYFS and I looked at all the footnotes, and I've separated out every piece of additional guidance that they refer to. And I've actually put links to that, where it links into the EYFS, and a little overview of what it is. So for example, they refer to guidance on sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, or cot death. They refer to 2 pieces of NHS guidance that they suggest we actually use. They also refer to some new cyber security guidance that is also there as a link in those footnotes. So I'm quite happy to share that document. I will send it to Barbara tomorrow, and please make use of it, because it's those little things in the footnotes that we don't always bother with. We look for the headlines, we don't always look at the detail. Okay, if we can move on again, Wendelin. So I talked about the new early learning goals, which is where the majority of the changes are. There are still 17 early learning goals in total. However, those subheadings have changed, and we just look at them very, very quickly. In the prime areas, we've got communication and language, we've got physical development, and we've got PSED, just as we had before. But the goals beneath those have changed, and we've now got listening, attention, and understanding. We've got speaking, and then under physical development, that's been just categorized as gross motor skills and fine motor skills. PSED, the early learning goals that sit beneath those, are around self-regulation, managing self, and building relationships. Then if we go on to look at the next slide, and we will see the specific areas: literacy, understanding the world, expressive arts and design, and mathematics. And again, the goals that sit beneath those have changed. There have been, I think probably I'm right in saying, Barbara, there's been more tension in the communication language, the literacy and the mathematics than any other areas that have been changed. So there have been some concessions made, and there have been some minor changes, but fundamentally the goals that are there are the ones that we are keeping. The other thing that has given a little cause for concern and still hasn't changed despite all the feedback is that they've taken information technology out of understanding the world as well, which I still don't quite understand their rationale for doing that, but they have. But I'm thankful to see that they have referred to it in the educational programmes at least. So one thing that Ofsted, the Department for Education, are telling us over and over again is that the early learning goals are not our curriculum. I would say, and I've suggested this to some people, block them out of the EYFS when you're actually looking at it, to get your practitioners, to get your educators really thinking about the programs, the educational programs. What some people do is they tend to go straight to the early learning goals. And we should not do that. We must never do that. So block them out, rip that page out for now and hide it, and actually get people to go straight to those educational programs and focus on those, because that's what we're all about. If we can go on again, Wendelin, thank you. So let's just take stock for a moment. The key points: the early learning goals are not the curriculum. So be reassured on that. And that's where those major changes are in the EYFS, and we don't have to worry about those. The goals are there to be used to assess children at the end of reception rather than for preschool children. In early years settings, our main focus is on the educational programs. In other words, the activities and the experiences we provide that support children's learning and development. Thank you, Wendelin. If we can move on again. So let's think about those revised educational programs for a moment. The activities and experiences are set out under the prime and specific areas of learning. So they're set out under those headings. They are longer, they're more in depth, and they contain some examples of things that you can do with children. But that doesn't mean that we're actually going to go through and just do those things. These are just examples. How you deliver your educational programs and the activities that you use to do that is down to you. But there is a focus on early language and extending vocabulary, with more examples on how to embed and develop those vocabulary skills. And that runs across all 7 areas, because this improves child development in a broad curriculum. One thing that Ofsted say quite a lot, and I have to agree, it's put very simplistically: knowing more words makes you smarter. So I do have to agree with the intent of that phrase, actually. And they also talk very much about the importance of hooking new knowledge onto existing knowledge as well. So when we're considering our educational programs, that's what we're thinking about. What knowledge does the child come to us with? What were their starting points? What experience of cultural capital have they had previously? What do we need to do to actually build on what they've come to? Children, as you know, I don't need to tell you this, but children are not empty vessels that we simply fill with knowledge. They all bring something to us, to our provision, and we build on that through our educational programs. There is that increased emphasis on books, stories, and rhymes across all of those educational programs, as I said before. And that makes sense, of course it does, but we also need to acknowledge that those aren't the only way that children learn as well. They are important, they're invaluable. And of course, giving children that love of books, stories, and rhymes helps to increase their vocabulary and actually gives them the tools and resources they need to become lifelong learners. Okay, if we can move on again. And that's it really for the EYFS for the moment. But what we also have issued are two separate pieces of non-statutory guidance that supports the early years foundation stage. On the one hand, we have Birth to 5 Matters, which was written by the Early Years Coalition, and their strapline, their slogan, if you like, is "From the sector for the sector." So this has been written by early years experts, a group of people who came together, some of the most revered and esteemed people currently working in early years, of which we are very, very proud to say that Barbara is one of those people, representatives from my own organisation as well. And I did stand on the periphery of that as well and had some involvement, but very, very minor. Then on the other hand, we have the Department for Education's document, again, non-statutory curriculum guidance, development matters. Now, don't be fooled into thinking this is a direct rewrite of your existing development matters, because it isn't. It's got the same title, it might look the same on the front cover, but very different. So both documents are non-statutory. You can choose which one you use. We'll go through them in a little bit more detail in a moment, but really they both have their merits. They both have some limitations. So it's really important that you explore, take some time to explore both documents. They're both available in hard copy and both can be downloaded free of charge from their respective websites as well. So if we move on again. Again, just to stop and take stock for a moment, those key points that I've mentioned. The educational programs, the early years curriculum, those terms are interchangeable. It's interesting that the EYFS refers to educational programs, Ofsted refer to the early years curriculum, but they are both the same thing. Ofsted do not and have never prescribed a particular approach to how you deliver your curriculum. And I think one of the joys of the revised EYFS, and certainly Birth to 5 Matters as a guidance document, is it enables you to deliver a programme of education which is based very much on your principles, your values, and your beliefs about how young children learn and develop. The educational programmes are examples of activities and experiences that may support the areas of learning and development. So although they've been expanded in the revised EYFS, it is still you as professionals as well that know and understand the unique child, know and understand how children learn and develop. And so those examples are things that you can build on that will steer you in the right direction. And just that final reminder there about Birth to 5 Matters and development matters being non-statutory. So if we just move on again. So that was the learning and development requirements, the changes. And then in section 3 of the EYFS, the safeguarding and welfare requirements. So I've just picked out a few of those key changes just to go through those quickly with you now. So as said before, under the child protection section, reference to LSCBs has been replaced by local safeguarding partners. So if you've got policies and procedures currently that refer to LSCBs, first thing you need to do is check, because not all LSCBs have changed yet. Most are in the process. They've actually changed their procedures, but not all of them have changed their terminology. They're not all calling themselves local safeguarding partners yet. So just check and see what's going on in your area. That additional guidance that I talked about, one of which is online safety considerations and additional guidance. So we've always had to do this in child protection, the safeguarding section. It's always talked about keeping children safe online. It's talked about e-safety, but things move on, particularly when we're talking about e-safety, internet safety. Every few months, it seems, there is something else that we need to consider. So the additional guidance looks at what the current issues are and will be updated. So do have a look for that guidance and download it, and just so that you can be sure in your provision that you're actually promoting children's safety online and thinking about what the risks to children and to your own staff are online. Under health, promoting good health includes oral health. And then for premises, they've just clarified a few things here. So these things that we've always known, that we've always had to do, but they've now clarified them, reworded it slightly. Outdoor space cannot be counted to increase numbers, but provision that is exclusively outdoors is not required to meet space standards. And probably the reason they've done that is probably because there are more and more outdoor provision actually cropping up. And one of the things that we knew during the pandemic as well was it was actually safer to be outdoors. One of the reasons why Scotland, I think it was, actually opened some of their provision a lot sooner than the rest of the country, because they were actually promoting their outdoor provision. They have quite a lot up there in Scotland. And it also clarifies that need for sleeping children to be safe. So it's nothing new, but it's just that absolute clarification. And because it's in the EYFS, it is something that Ofsted will expect to see. If we move on again. So thinking about how to prepare for September then. So certainly review your policies and your procedures to make sure they reflect the changes in the safeguarding and welfare requirements. For example, have you got a procedure for oral health? For example, does your procedure reflect how you keep sleeping children safe? You know, the monitoring, the awareness of the risk to children, the guidance that they refer to in the footnote, the NHS guidance, is actually for parents about how to put children down to sleep safely. Making sure that every member of your team understands the emphasis on the educational programmes and what Ofsted are looking for. The myth busting I put in there is very much about this idea that Ofsted do not want to see paperwork. They really don't want to spend their time looking at paperwork. What they want to do is observe practice. They want to observe the quality of your teaching and learning. They want to know that every educator in your provision understands the individual child, understands what their starting points are, what they're working on now, and what they need to be, or what you want for them in the future, what you're planning for them next, the activities and the experiences that you're going to have in this progressive curriculum that actually moves that individual child forward. Review the non-statutory supporting guidance documents and decide which, if any, you feel meets your needs and reflects your approach. So I'm talking about development matters, I'm talking about birth to 5 matters. You can use either, you can use neither. It's up to you. I think that's more or less it from me. So I'm hoping that you banked up a lot of questions there. What I will say, and I'm going to do a very small plug here, I've been writing virtual classrooms, which members and non-members can actually book onto. And those virtual classrooms go into a lot more detail about the changes. So I've done one which is around an overview of the changes. The second one, which I'm writing currently, is about these two supporting documents. So I've really had time to explore those so that I could actually write these virtual classrooms. And I would just suggest to any of you that you set some time aside to actually look. Birth to Five Matters website, amazing resource bank. You know, it's your one-stop shop. Have a look at Development Matters and see how that speaks to you and see how that chimes with what you want. Okay, so thank you, and I will take any questions now. I'm not guaranteeing I can answer them all, but those that I can't answer, I will send that FAQs through to you. So over to you.
I think we have got the very first question already in the chat, Melanie. What do we need to show for assessment, for evidence for Ofsted?
Okay.
Want to see. So you talked about formative assessments and the summative assessments. What do you think they should look like?
Okay, well, the only mandatory summative assessment that Ofsted would expect to see evidence of, if you like, and Ofsted are actually trying to get away from that word evidence as well. But the only summative assessment you are required to do in the EYFS is your 2-year-old progress check. Any other summative assessment you do is down to you, really, and the way that you do it is down to you. So it's about thinking about why you're assessing, what you're assessing, and what you're going to do with that information. You are never doing it for Ofsted. So that taking stock, standing back and doing a summative assessment, which you might share with parents, that you might put in a child's learning journey, is always useful, isn't it? But we use it because it shows us where that child is going, what they started from and how far they've progressed. So it's time to take stock. And it really, really is down to you. I was listening to a webinar with Ofsted just the other day, and somebody asked them that very, very question. And they said, we don't want to see any. It's down to you. Childminders, for example, they don't expect a childminder with a small group of children. Now they're saying all that information the childminder can hold in their head. They don't have to produce any paperwork to prove that they know the child, because they can talk about the child. That's more important than actually having a formal assessment.
But effectively, your summative assessment would be the information that you are sharing with parents at a parents meeting, or when the child leaves your setting, or
Definitely.
that is what would be your summative assessment.
Yeah.
But you can articulate when you speak about the unique child in your setting, you can demonstrate the formative assessment by the way how you describe what the child has learned, what they are interested in, and therefore what you are likely to offer them for the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And formative assessment really is about that idea of just noting when a child has done something, when they've achieved something, when they've mastered a skill that they've been working on, and you making a note of it, which you would again share with the parents, that you would put in their learning journey or learning journals or whatever format that you use. And that summative assessment, yes, when the child moves on, or if a child moves on to another setting, then you would want to stop and take stock and actually summarize that child's learning and development at that time, because it's appropriate to do so. But summative assessment for the sake of it, and I've heard settings before saying, well, we're required to do 4 summative assessments a year. You know, well, why? Who's it for?
And who said?
And who said? This is the other thing, isn't it? Who said? Yes, absolutely.
There's one question which I was going to ask you myself, and that is from Claire, who says, do children staying in a setting for year reception need to do the baseline assessment? And that's a very interesting question, isn't it?
It is, and there is an answer to that. because it says in the guidance in the EYFS, and I honestly cannot remember the answer. So hands up, I cannot remember. But there is a clear answer to that. It is written in that reception baseline assessment guidance, and I will put that in my FAQs.
Good, that's lovely. Thank you. Did you have a private question?
Yes, I did, and actually that it's the same sort of thing, that if a child stays in the setting for their reception year,
Yes,
does the setting need to do the baseline assessment for that child? And what did you mean by local authority not moderating?
on the earliest foundation stage profile, I mean, we don't have to worry about that, but one of the big changes was, I think previously the local authority had the responsibility to monitor EYFSPs, and they no longer have to do that. The detail of that I do not know, because
I have got some information on that, Melanie.
You do that, Barbara, and I'm going to look for an answer to the RBA question.
Good, thank you.
The question also, Barbara, is if the child is staying for their reception year, does the setting need to do the baseline assessment?
Yes, so Melanie will look at the baseline assessment because I don't know the answer to that. But the question to the earliest foundation stage profile, if the child stays for reception year, you will have to complete it. And in the past, if you have done this, you would have had to submit the profile to the local authority for moderation. This is now no longer required, but there's a suggestion that there will still be some form of peer moderation amongst settings. So it is quite possible that the person who had moderated your profile previously would be willing to give you some feedback on it. Effectively, the reason why they have scrapped the moderation has been the cost of it, because it was a very expensive process for the local authority, and they are trying to not only economize, but also streamline the workload. And this was one of the things that added to the workload. So that's why they have said it will not have to be moderated.
Okay, yeah. Barbara, I have a definitive answer for you. And I thought this was the case. The reception baseline assessment is a school assessment. So if the child has stayed behind for any reason, if the child has remained within your provision and has delayed their school start, you do not have to do the reception baseline assessment. I will read here. It is solely intended for use within the primary school, not an early years setting.
That was what I was hoping for. I was hoping that because the baseline assessment data is in a way part of the school's data, it would not mean anything. It's one of the contested issues about the baseline, that what is it for? Where will it go? How will it be used? We don't know.
Yes, absolutely. So we do not have to worry about that. What if the setting, oh Caroline, you are challenging us. I've just seen that coming. What if the setting extends to year 2? That's fine, Caroline, that's what we're here for. My understanding from just having glanced through that again to remind myself is that if the child joins school later, actual school later, then the RBA can still be done within the first 6 weeks. So it's not necessarily age dependent. It's about when the child actually starts in formal education within the school. Does that answer your question, Gav? Thank you.
There's also, sorry, Barbara, I didn't mean to.
Go on. It's moved up my screen.
Something that we were talking about before everyone joined us is this thing about the age bands and how there is, how we're slightly missing them now, or we might be missing them. And Debbie's asking, for the 2 to 3 progress check, do we use the new age band checkpoints in the development matters to measure progress?
Yeah, and again, there is no set format, is there, for a 2-year-old progress check? You can use the document that used to be in the old supporting documentation that we have, and I think it was NCB that put that together, and that of course has got, you know, you would refer to those age bands. No, you still make that judgment based on your knowledge of child development and what you would expect a child to be doing for their age, because what we're looking for in that 2-year-old progress check is if there are any signs that we are concerned about a child's development. It's not about placing them within a band, an age band. It's about whether they are progressing as we would expect to see them progressing. And you can use, certainly in birth, if you look in Birth to 5 Matters, they talk about age ranges, and they give some examples of what a child might be doing within an age range. So you could actually refer to that and make your judgment or your assessment based on those age ranges. So what's a typical trajectory for a child is what you will find in the Birth to 5 Matters document, if that helps. A lot of people are very nervous about the fact that those age bands have gone. And one of the justifications for doing that is really around the fact that we know that children's learning and development isn't linear. They don't go from one stage to the next. We know that those those ages and stages overlap, and it's different for every child. We know that some children go ahead in leaps and bounds where others don't. We know that some children also regress in their learning and development. And when you think about the situation over lockdown and over the pandemic, we know that many children have regressed certainly in their speech and language. I was hearing about that today, people telling me, and children actually presenting in their early years settings with very strong American accents because of the amount of screen time they've had and the programs they've been watching. So if you were trying to categorize, you may not necessarily be worried about that child, but you would know that they wouldn't fit into that defined and tight age band that you would previously have been able to put them in. So again, we've got to get, and I think Barbara will probably elaborate on this much more eloquently than I have, but we've got to get better at relying on our professional judgment about those ages and stages.
And also the 2-year check is to identify the starting point for the child. So what have you learned within the first 3 months of the child joining you? What, you know, how do you understand that child? So then when you do further observations or when you plan learning for the child, you will know what to focus. And I think that, you know, that's what, and also you are supposed to engage the parents in the 2-year check. So you may start with the parents telling you about their child, what they know about them, and then building on that on your assessment. So I think that would be, I mean, that's the way how I would handle that. And we have always done that. We may not have written it down on a piece of paper, but you always had a picture in your head of what the child is interested in, what they are good at, what are the areas where you may want to put a little bit more attention to.
Absolutely, yes. And again, those starting points are so very important, aren't they, Barbara? Because if we don't establish the child's starting points, then how can we see how far they've come?
Absolutely.
And that's where...
How can we celebrate what the children really have learned whilst they have been in the setting? And I think that, you know, the thing that I have learned about the new EYFS, then for you as Montessori practitioners, you have your Montessori early years curriculum. You have got the principles of the unique child, the positive relationships. Interestingly enough, the new document focuses positive relationships that focus on the adult interaction with the child. That's a new element in definition of the positive relationships. And also when you are looking at the learning environment, that is, all of these are absolutely at the heart of Montessori practice. So always starting with the principles of the unique child is a very, very important part of your revision. And then I would go through the educational programs and just give examples of what you do in your practice in order to meet those requirements or those descriptions of educational programs. That's where you could demonstrate that you have engaged with the new documents and that you are comfortable with your practice because you know you are already doing it. And I have absolutely, having read through those programs again this afternoon very carefully, I have no doubt that all of you are doing all the things that are required from you. And above all, you are doing the things that are not mentioned in the documents. For example, like the child's real experiences. For us as Montessorians, the sensory experiences of the child, the exploration of the objects in the environment are very, very important starting point on which you can then build the knowledge of the vocabulary. Just think about the focus on using proper terms in your Montessori training. We have always, think about the geometric cabinet and what the children can learn about shapes in that cabinet. We have got very strong basis in vocabulary. And of course, it would then, those real experiences will naturally lead you to looking at books, at storytelling, at children's role play and how to extend their language. So we have got all the tools to continue to demonstrate that the Montessori pedagogy is strong and contributes well towards children's learning without us having to be too focused on the formal teaching, because children learn so much from the prepared environment. They learn so much from their peers. You just need to be able to demonstrate that this happens. And as Melanie was doing the presentation, I was so well reminded of all the webinars that we have done in the last 3 months. We have looked at self-regulation. We have had a really wonderful presentation of the Birth to 5 Matters. And as Melanie said, the website is a fantastic resource. And if I wanted to do some in-house training for my staff, that's where I would go first to see what is available. Also, the beginning introductions, the first 20, 30 pages of Birth to 5 Matters give such strong definitions, for example, what we understand by inclusion. And it also gives strong emphasis on the characteristics of effective learning, which for me still remain the key focus of demonstrating the learning opportunities we provide for children in our settings. And as you know, we will be looking at the characteristics in the webinar next week, and we will be using some of the resources available on the Birth to 5 website. So hopefully that will make it become more familiar to you as practitioners. But I personally do not envisage any challenges within the implementation of the new EYFS. And like, I would urge you to look at both of the non-statutory documents so that you feel well informed and you feel comfortable in your decision to use whichever one of those documents you choose. But I would always go to Birth to 5 Matters to look at the resources to support your staff. And I would go to it when inducting new members of the team, and I would go to it when introducing or giving your new members of the team tools to demonstrate that Montessori provision is relevant to the children whose parents have chosen it as their means of learning. I think that we still need to focus on working with parents and supporting what parents want for their children.
Very well said, Barbara.
So, any more questions? I'm sorry if my monologue had stopped you from asking questions.
I'd just be very interested to know how many people have really had a chance to sit down and look at the new EYFS yet.
Probably not many.
No, I understand that completely.
And you know, people have had to manage so many things
Yes.
in providing relevant provision for children during lockdown, and to be connected with the families and having to look after their own families.
Yes.
But this I have said, let's wait until the final document comes out before we do anything about it, because we could be just worrying about something that we don't know what it will look like. But the new document doesn't pose huge challenges. I feel
Not,
quite confident about that.
not at all. And from my perspective, if there was one thing I'd like people to take from tonight, is actually, you know what, you've already got this. You've got it. You're already doing it. And again, just focusing on those educational programs, having that dialogue with your colleagues, I think is how you will reach that shared understanding of, well, yes, actually, what's really changed, because we were doing this anyway.
The question about the oral hygiene has
Yes.
come up, and what I wanted to say about that, just for your information, perhaps, Melanie, that many of the Montessori settings have already done teeth brushing after lunch as a matter of fact practice. But of course, the oral health is also not only doing it, but also explaining why we need to do it. Why is it important to look after our teeth? And as I say to my granddaughter, you need to look after your teeth so you don't end up with teeth like mine.
That's the phrase that I often use, having just had a couple of dental implants, which are very expensive and quite a long process to go through. No, I think the thing is, so Ofsted are going to want to know that you promote oral health in your setting. So yes, toothbrushing may be a part of that. This doesn't mean that you have to introduce toothbrushing in your setting. And a lot of settings have actually suspended that during the pandemic as well. And I think they've reverted to something called dry toothbrushing, whereby they're not using paste and water and so on, but literally the children just using their dry toothbrushes. So that's one thing. So we can put that to one side, because that's down to you whether you introduce a program of toothbrushing after meal times. It's looking very much more broadly at oral health as well. So things like where you've got younger children, perhaps supporting and encouraging parents with the age-old dilemma of giving up the dummy, because we know that really is very detrimental to the way that children's teeth form, and you know there's all sorts of issues with that, the speech and language as well. So that's part of oral health. It's about promoting those good eating habits as well. The biggest danger, as my dentist keeps telling me, to my teeth is my fondness for sweet things. You know, so again, how we actually promote healthy eating in the setting, how the meals that you provide within the setting actually are good for children, for their dental health and their physical health and so on. A lot of settings will work with somebody within their local authority who, a lot of the health protection teams actually have an oral health program, like an award that you can apply for. So you prove that you're doing certain things with the children and you can actually get this particular award. And lots of different local authorities have different incentives for getting people to engage with that. So that's certainly something that I would look at as well. So in terms of your procedure, you're making, as you always do with a policy, you make a statement about what that actually looks like in your setting, the things that you actually do, the activities that you engage in, the conversations you have with parents and with the children to support oral health in the broadest sense. And from there, you can put your procedure together and build on that as well.
That's great.
Hope that answers the question.
Michelle made or has reflected that if we are able to articulate our Montessori curriculum well and explain how the children are learning within the 7 areas of learning, particularly focusing on the prime areas, because so many of the children are younger, do we still need birth to 5 matters or development matters? No, we don't. Maybe you have not used development matters before, because the online recording system that you have bought have tracked the children's progress according to development matters quite automatically for you. But I think it's always useful to see, to be able to articulate your Montessori practice in a broader sense, in line with documentation that is available, so that we can demonstrate that we can really speak about Montessori pedagogy in a universal language. I think over the years there has been a huge tendency to hide behind the things. Oh, in Montessori we don't do this, or this is not very Montessori. That is not really a professional approach to the issue. You need to know why we wouldn't want to do it in the Montessori environment. How does it fit in with the principles of the EYFS, which effectively are the same as the principles of the Montessori approach? So I would very much urge you, and also because you can then talk to earlier colleagues about what you do in a language that is shared, and it may introduce some people to the Montessori approach, which we so value and celebrate as something good to give to children.
Absolutely. Can't add anything to that at all, Barbara.
We have had some delicious replies. As have people gone through the EYFS? Some people have gone through it very diligently. Others have thumbed through it. Others have highlighted and posted. So there is some level of engagement. A good start, I think, shall we say.
I would like to think that everybody has it under their pillow at night. So if they can't sleep, they can just whip out the EYFS and have a quick look through it, just as I do. There you go.
Well, I think that having a glass of wine is a better remedy to having a sleep without having to look at the EYFS, but it is each one to their own. Thank you, Melanie. I think it has been very informative, very clear. Thank you also for allowing us to share your PowerPoint, because we always share the recording with the participants on the following day. Thank you also for offering to share some of the other documents which you have prepared. We value your expertise and your clarity, and I wish you all well. The challenges, I'm sure that we will return to the topic as we begin to implement the EYFS next September, when we probably will have a more sharing session of what you have done, what has worked well for you, and what would you advise others to do. Thank you very much indeed, Melanie, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wensley, as well. Thank you.